I spend the rest of this year alone, when I can go therapy?
Hi guys, this is Kristen Martinez. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of California. And this channel is called Talk It Out. It's all for community-based therapists who want to become experts or want support in being experts in trauma-informed care. And today I want to talk about what is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance. So hypervigilance is a difficult symptom to understand, because the original way that we understand it, and we've been taught to understand it, is through the easiest examples of like post-traumatic stress with veterans. And hypervigilance with veterans is, I don't want to say it's more extreme, because it's not necessarily more extreme. It's just more obvious. Because you can visibly see a lot of times you can visibly see the change in the body. Whereas with a lot of other complex chronic trauma survivors, it's a lot more difficult to actually see hypervigilance. And so you have to ask a lot of questions in order to understand if hypervigilance is actually happening. Where I do that the most, where I find it to be the most telling, is in when they're lying in bed trying to go to sleep. So when you're lying in bed trying to go to sleep, generally speaking, people without post-traumatic stress disorder or without trauma are not fazed by the small sounds happening in the house. However, somebody who has struggled with complex chronic trauma might hear small sounds like crickets, like doors squeaking, like somebody, even down to the change in somebody's breathing, and it can start them to have the trauma response. Hypervigilance is the idea of a constant awareness in both your body and your mind that danger could be coming. Sometimes another way that I talk about hypervigilance, and I try and see if it's happening with a client, is by talking about how they hear somebody entering the house. When do they start to hear the person? Like, can they hear the car drive up to the house? Can they hear the car park in the driveway? Most people can do that. Most people hear it. But the difference with somebody who is hypervigilant is most likely they know who that person is, right? By either the time of day, by a number of cues that they're very acutely aware of. They know by the pace of somebody's footstep, by the way the keys are jangled, by the way the person twists the doorknob, who that person is. These are the kinds of questions that I ask to get into their mind, get into their internal experience. Because most people suffering, especially with complex chronic trauma, their symptoms can be invisible. And the reason they look invisible is because people who have chronic complex trauma have lived their lives with this. And they've figured out ways to be resilient and to find ways to live with hypervigilance. And so a lot of the times we can't actually see it. We have to get into the internal experience. So those are two of my favorite ways of trying to get at if somebody is experiencing hypervigilance or not. You can also find other ways, like a lot of times people have heard of highly sensitive people who tend to have a lot of trauma in their history. And what I want to say with that, like hypervigilance is people who call themselves a good read, like I read people really well, a lot of times have a lot of interpersonal trauma, and being able to read people is actually a survival skill. It comes down to hypervigilance, being able to read body language, read possible intent for people. That all comes from an experience of trauma and is directly related to hypervigilance. So if you have a client who's saying that they read people really well, that they know kind of what somebody's going to do in a given situation, they tend to recognize when there are people who could be dangerous around them, and it has worked for them in the past. Their sleep, like I said, they're very acutely aware of what's going on around them in the house, where things are, if things are moved, if they're hearing sounds at night. They're very acutely aware of their surroundings, right? And the last one is being able, I always like something concrete. So being able to know who's walking through the door, before they ever enter the door. So those are some things that I really find helpful in getting to know hypervigilance. If you're watching this video and you're not a therapist, if you've experienced any of those things and you're like, whoa, that really explains some of the things that I feel, just go Google therapists who specialize in trauma and get somebody who really knows what they're doing and who knows what they're talking about to help you. But for all the therapists, those are what the best questions I could tell you to help seeing if a client actually meets the criteria for hypervigilance, which is just one symptom of one criteria of post-traumatic stress disorder. So good luck. If you guys want, feel free to reach out to me, comment below, subscribe to the channel. Thanks, guys. Bye.